Welcome to the Cracking the Growth Code podcast, where we explore practical growth and leadership insights to take you and your organization to the next level. I'm your host, Matt Zembruski, and I'm pleased to have as my guest today, Felipe Engineer-Manriquez.
Thank you, Matt. It's my pleasure being on the show. Long time coming. I think we've been long-time LinkedIn friends and connections, so super happy to be here at 0 Dark 30 with you this morning.
Yes, for those of you listening or watching, I'm on the East Coast, so it's a little bit after 8 a.m. we're doing recording. Felipe is on the West Coast, and it's a little bit after 5 a.m. So thank you so much for making the time and getting up and getting ready to go for this. I'll give a quick introduction, then I want to hear a little bit more about your background, your introduction, as we get into it, Felipe. Felipe is a best-selling author and keynote speaker. He's the Project Delivery Services Director at the Bold Company and host of the EBFC Show podcast. And we'll ask him to explain that a little bit more. He's got the cup there. He's got the branding right on point. He's renowned for driving change and construction with lean and agile practices. He simplifies work processes significantly. As a registered Scrum trainer and Lean Construction Institute Chairman's Award recipient, Felipe leads through coaching, social media, and his book, Construction Scrum. Felipe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. So good to be here. And it's good I think this is only my second time ever being interviewed by a fellow Agilist. So this is going to be a good one.
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of several Agilists, a lot of Agile leaders, a lot of executives, a lot of CEOs and C-level executives. And yeah, when I talk with someone who's got a similar background, Agile, Lean, there's just so much we can get into. We have a lot of fun. So I'm really excited. And a lot of our audience, by the way, comes from similar backgrounds, current and future leaders in the Agile space, tech space, could be construction space too. We'll find out, but it's a pretty wide net. So well, let's start out with a little bit more about you, to introduce you, your company, your role. You have a lot going on, the podcast and your company, your books, and all different things. So introduce a little bit more about yourself, your role, what you're up to, what you're passionate about. Give the audience a little bit more of an idea of who you are, and then we'll get into some more good questions.
Absolutely. So we'll start with what everyone's wondering: is engineer his last name? Yes, it is my last name. I married into it. It's a long story. It has to do with my father, but I did study electrical engineering, do have a degree. It's a double E. Later got my master's in business using Scrum, got my entire degree. Every course I took when I was getting my MBA, my fellow classmates, my group mates would ask me, "Oh, this is your last course because you're so organized." It's like, no. It's like that happened through the whole first year. And I just always tell people I'm using this agile method of organizing myself called Scrum. And I said, if you're going to work with me in a group, you're going to use it by default. And if you want to learn, I teach it to you. But if you don't, enjoy the ride. And it was super smooth. So that's what a little bit getting to where I am now. And I work for the Bolt Company. It's just over my shoulder. Let me get out of the camera view.
BOLDT.
Yeah, the Bolt Company is a large general contractor. We're headquartered in beautiful Wisconsin, and we work from coast to coast across the United States. I sit in an office here in lovely California, the Golden Coast, which inside the company, I like to tell people it's the best coast. But there's a lot of great places around the country that are awesome. So no matter what city you're listening to the show from, I've probably been to your city for work, and I love it. I love to travel. The first year, I did a significant amount of traveling. I booked over 100 flights and flew over to 100 flights. Sometimes I was going to 3 cities a week. And this year, after 2 years of doing that, we've decided to expand our program in Project Delivery Services, which is the group that I work in. I'm operations. So I am situated here in California. Now I'm focused more on just the Golden State. So I'm going up and down the state. We've got plenty of work here to keep me busy every day. This week, I think I have three projects in 3 different cities to visit this week here locally. And then I do occasionally go back to Wisconsin. I try to save it for the summer months so I don't have to freeze, because after living in California for over 15 years, Matt, my blood has changed, and the cold does not do me well. Yeah, when I go back in the winter, I'll go back in layers. Like I have thermals, and I have a closet full of my old Chicago jackets just for the times that I go back east or the central part, or if I have to go north in California, change elevations, because we have, depending on where you are, we do have 4 seasons in California as well.
Yeah, it's a conditioning thing that I've seen as well. I was born and raised in New England. My dad was as well, but my dad is older now. He lives in Florida on his own, and he has it's not as age related as it is more location related. Since he moved down there, he's like, oh, it's 65. It's a little chilly. I'm going to put on a windbreaker. I'm like, 65.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it happens. It does happen. Your body acclimates. But I've been in construction for now over 25 years. I've always worked on the management side. I've had the good fortune of being many roles, including superintendent, project manager, trade engineer. One time I was even a cost engineer. And then, don't tell anybody, but I used to also be an estimator and a project scheduler. So I've had a few roles. And so we were joking before the recording started, and I was telling Matt, I said, I am a recovering project manager. Still.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of topics I want to get into here about Agile and leadership and project manager. So explain that a little bit more for some of the folks who maybe don't have as much experience. You and I have similar backgrounds with a lot of project management. I actually graduated electrical computer engineering too, back in the day. So we have similar backgrounds, but the term project management, I think, has evolved a lot over the years, or at least what people think about it. So talk a little bit more about recovering project manager and sort of how that relates or doesn't relate to your role today.
Yeah. I mean, today I work with a lot of PMs. So if any of my PM friends or coworkers are listening, take it personally. But I was telling Matt that, when I was younger in my career, I thought getting to PM would be that would be awesome. When I first started in construction as an electrical engineer, I had to learn construction. I had some really good mentors. My mentors were amazing. Particularly, I had a lot of women mentors, and I thought being a PM would be a great place to land. And even halfway through my career, I met a PM who had been a PM almost his entire career and was retiring. So, I mean, it wasn't uncommon, not now. It's not common now, but it wasn't uncommon 15 years ago that somebody could work in construction, get to the level of project manager, work and retire, from that role. And now that's no longer the case. So I became a PMP, project management professional, through PMI before I got my MBA. It was like my little test waters, can I learn? Because after graduating with my EE, and I started as a computer engineer, Matt, so we have even more in common than you think. And then I changed majors later because I was in school during Y2K. Now everyone knows how old I was when I was in university, and that's okay. I know, look at all this gray hair. It's gorgeous, especially this side. But after that, I did start doing some more research, and I discovered Agile when I was probably a few years into playing with Lean, and specifically Lean construction techniques, which I didn't learn until after a decade plus being in the business. It's just not taught. It's not taught anywhere, and it's not talked about anywhere. And so I learned it from another person who had worked in manufacturing. And then that person got me connected into Lean Construction and the Lean Construction Institute that I've been now volunteering for almost 10 years. So that's been a long time relationship. And this is true. This is true, Matt. Earlier last week, I had a phone call from somebody that met me on LinkedIn, because my phone number is on LinkedIn. And I tell people, if you have a question about whatever I'm posting or topics, just pick up the phone and call. It's right there. So for all the people trying to sell me stuff and you're like, what's your contact information? You're automatically blocked because it's on my profile and you're just not paying attention. No cut and paste for me, please. But anyway, this guy called me. His name's Jason. And he's like, does Lean Construction Institute pay you well? He's like, you do so much work for them. I was like, they don't pay me anything. I'm a volunteer, but they do sponsor my podcast. So they've sponsored my show since episode 2. So I've been lucky, and we've had a good relationship. but it's a volunteer relationship. That's what it is. And the reason for that is it creates a community and a space for people to come together. Just like in Agile, there are many meetups and different types of communities and gatherings that people have. And I think that's so important for people to come together and talk. And it's nothing about sharing company secrets. And for everybody listening, I'm going to let me explode company secrets for just 3 seconds, or maybe a little bit more, Matt. You be the judge of how long I take to get this out. But a lot of company executives, and construction is no different. And I mean, we see this in every industry, and I've got friends in manufacturing, pharmaceuticals as well. And the same thing is true there. But what people don't realize is that there's this thing in companies called attrition. And attrition is a fancy word to describe the people that voluntarily leave on their own and go work for somebody else, or get fired, or get asked to leave. Right? So any way that breaks that relationship. And on average in the United States, construction companies have about a 25% attrition rate, according to survey data from some of the bigger companies that do such, like Human Resources survey data for construction. So 25%. So you think about that, on average, every 4 years, you have a completely new company. And so for all the executives that worry about those types of things, the enemy is already inside, and people are already leaving to take information to your enemy. If you want to think that way, if you think that's not happening, then you're just not paying attention to your entire business. And you contrast that with companies like Toyota, which Lean is built on. It's unarguable. It's cannot argue that it's not built there from what we know. And people forget that even there, it took a long time, and they still struggle with spreading their type of ideology and processes across their entire company. And it's striking that at companies like Toyota, their attrition rate is less than 1%.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. And some people even make jokes on LinkedIn that used to work there, and they say it's kind of like a cult. And it absolutely is. If you think about like the environment that a company could create where nobody wants to leave, it is going to be kind of like a cult. So that's just a little bit of contrast for everybody. And then Toyota even opens up their factories. I mean, before COVID, I think things now are getting back to the same post-COVID, where finally we can start to say post-COVID all these years later. But you can go tour and see everything behind the scenes and how their assembly line works. It's wide open. And people, even here in the United States, I have friends that schedule trips to go and see from Toyota. And no company in the world, and you can benchmark against Tesla if you want to, but if you start digging into the metrics, Tesla does not compare to the reach and the quality that Toyota has, and how even Toyota treats their workers. I mean, there's story after story about the abuse that people at Tesla suffer, and the same is true in the gig factory construction as well that they have. It's just a different approach, a different ideology.
Yeah, very, very true. Felipe, I love how you brought up the company secrets and you relate that to attrition. I think that's the biggest, I would say, hidden expense, because it's mostly ignored at a practical level. When you say like 25% attrition, that's typical across a lot of companies. I mean, some are more like 10%, 20%, some are 30 plus. And that is a significant, if you put dollars to that, I put some rough dollars to it just in the tech space, and I estimated over $2 trillion per year just in the US is flushed down the toilet due to attrition. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. It's a passionate point for me, because I love the fact that you brought up that Toyota is only 1%, because they're definitely the origination point for a lot of the lean and agile processes, manufacturing, technology, construction. It started there with their beginnings. So I think it's fantastic, because there's a lot of things that are not as clear as part of that story. If you look at the stats, 25% attrition costs companies a lot of money. 1% attrition costs Toyota a lot less money. So what, from your experience, do you think is a way to move from 25%, or is it even something you're trying to do to try to move that number down lower. Like, what are some thoughts that you have about ways to reduce attrition within your company or within the construction industry in general?
Oh, absolutely. I have so many thoughts about that. Thank you for asking. I became aware of that when I was studying Deming, William Edwards Deming, some years ago. As I was early on my lean journey, considered the great grandfather of it in so many different ways. And Deming would talk to these like huge rooms of like 500 plus people, and it was almost all C-suite people. And he would say, like, he was like, a lot of you, he was consulting his entire career until his 90s. And he'd say, in your companies, in your organizations, and he consulted a lot of the companies' household names people would know in the United States. And he'd say, you've got to create an environment where your leadership stops jumping every so many years, because it's creating like just a lack of, not a lack, but it's creating so much more variation. As new people come in, and he would go through like different statistics and like what it actually costs, because current accounting methods in the United States don't actually account for all the costs. So there's even a book on my shelf that I'm starting to read called Lean Accounting that talks about different measures and just financial things that people don't account for. And like you were saying, like, what does it cost an employee? So I think Gallup had a poll where they said like engagement was to the levels now that 70% of all employees are disengaged, where they're just coming to do the bare minimum, get their paycheck and leave. I mean, and if you think that Matt and I are exaggerating, just go down a rabbit hole on YouTube or TikTok, and you will find video after video of just abusive, horrible working condition things here in the U.S. I just watched a Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and he did a whole show on dollar stores and how dollar stores treat their employees and how profitable dollar stores are. And it's even though you're paying $1, it's not actually a good deal on almost every single category. But people don't know; they don't recognize that. So I absolutely, and at the Bolt company, the people that I work with, I tell them like I'm very competitive, but I'm only competitive with myself. I'm not trying to compare myself to other people. But I said I want to work at the best place ever, and so I want to create conditions where nobody ever wants to leave. So that people want to work, not because I want to be a cult leader. I definitely don't want that. Too much responsibility. It's too much paperwork. I'm not interested. But I'm creating a place where people actually enjoy coming to work. It just makes it better. Like, if you think about how many hours do we spend at work? I'm still a recovering workaholic. I'll easily put in north of 10 hours, and even sometimes I'll do 16. And there was one time this year for Bolt where I worked until 3 a.m, not because they forced me to, not because there was like a deadline, because I was in the zone. I was in flow, and I just stayed in the pocket and just worked. And I had a great time. And I told my boss about it. He's like, you don't need to work until 3 a.m. And that's how good I have it. I have such a great boss. Shout out to Nick. What a great person to work for. And so I think that type of environment where you can have a place where you can be in flow and flourish, that's going to attract people and keep people there. That's the answer. So the opposite of that is stagnant, high politics. Those are things that turn people off, or removing people's autonomy. So like and there are a lot of positions where there's some very low levels of autonomy, and some of it, Matt, is actually self-inflicted and self-enforced. There are people that come in, and I've heard this phrase at many different places, and they'll say things like, well, I can't. Well, who do you have to ask? So that's my first question. So I said, because we're coaches. So, we're helping people break through stuff. I'm like, well, who do we have to ask? And then because I'm in a director position, I can say, I give you permission. So now you can go ahead and you can make that change when you realize that the change that a lot of people aren't making is 100% within their control. So that's a part of it too. At Toyota, they spend a lot of time teaching people how processes work and how to think visually, and then they empower people to make changes, and they make north of 1 million improvements a year at their company across the entire planet. Now they're an international company operating in almost every country, or many countries. I don't know how many countries they're in currently. I don't know that stat. So
Yeah.
be kind to me, internet, be kind. But yeah, on average, people are making improvements weekly and daily, some people daily, but they've learned the process of how to do that. Whereas you think about all the companies we know, Matt, how many companies have an improvement process that's like standard and people know how to do it? Almost none.
Yeah. It's very, it's very low. I have a lot of experience in multiple industries, but coming out of my lean experience has been more on the manufacturing side. And I used to work for Bose Corporation with the speakers and the headsets and all that. And so much great lean manufacturing knowledge that I picked up there. I got lean certified there. But then if you as a coach or someone like you or me who have worked in different industries, if you go to another industry, say financial services, for instance, or insurance, things like this, they don't have a lean manufacturing background. So when you bring Agile to those companies, they don't think from an Agile lean perspective holistically, as you're talking about with Toyota and continuous improvement, the mindset. So I find it, and construction, I don't think started there either. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of, what you understand of how Agile and Lean came to the world of construction. It obviously attracted you from a electrical engineering, computer engineering background into more construction engineering and so forth. And there's a lot, in my head, it makes sense that Lean would get there because there's a lot of ways to optimize process. But I'd love to hear from you because you clearly understand the history. And I'd like to understand a little bit more and share with our audience your thoughts about the benefits of Agile and Lean thinking as it applies to the construction industry today, and maybe some examples of how that's been implemented.
Yeah, so it starts in construction. It really starts hitting in the 1990s. So there had been a lot of starts and stops, and some total quality management, business process improvement, even some of the the Peter Drucker era types of things that he deployed before. But Lean, as we know it, and the phrasing of Lean construction popped out in the 1990s. There was a group of people, I think they're mostly from, California. So again, California's amazing. I wasn't born in California, but I love it so much. I live here. So a group of people from Berkeley got together, and some consultants, some professors, some business owners, and I can't remember how many people, but it's less than 10. So it's really less than 10 people. And then at the same time, there was even a professor in Chile, Professor Alarcón. I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of his name because it's like I was telling my friend Paz, like I haven't read it enough times yet. But so in Chile and in the United States, like these researchers at Berkeley and this university down in Chile, like discover some things simultaneously. And I say simultaneously, it's relatively, like papers are published almost at the exact same time. Mm. And here in the United States, I'm going to diverge and just speak more to the US because that's the history I'm more familiar with. In the US, they were trying to answer a question of like, how can we improve how reliability and scheduling was like a big challenge the industry was having. Like there was cost overruns, and when you do the root cause analysis, it has to do with like timing of the project, how the project comes together. And so they created this production type of mindset, this production system, very similar to like what you see in Toyota. And they called it Last Planner System of Production Controls is the full name. That comes out in the 90s. Now, funny, Scrum also comes out in the 1990s. And so like these two systems evolved and came to the public immediately, almost within a year of each other. Mm. And even though you study the history of where Scrum comes from, and Jeff Sutherland's red book, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, and Dr. Sutherland is one of my mentors. I love Jeff, and Jeff wrote even the foreword to my book that's over my shoulder. And I'm a Agile education program, registered Scrum master, trainer, product owner, and Scrum at Scale practitioner. So that's a mouthful, man. I'm glad that I got that out in one breath. But so I'm in that trainer community, and I teach Scrum courses about every other month. And this also is true. Last night I had a dream, like literally when I woke up this morning at 4 a.m., I had woken up from a dream that I was in a boardroom. It was Bolt. This was a Bolt group from Minnesota had come to visit. I have yet to meet anyone from Bolt, Minnesota offices, but they're there. I've only met Darren on Zoom. Or Teams, because we use Teams. I haven't met him in real life, but we're in this meeting and they asked a question about how to improve something. And I turned to Darren and I said, well, Darren, if we just scrum this and we'll make it visual. And I went into this whole thing in my dream. And then when I woke up, I said, that dream was so good. I want to go back and see how this story turns out. And I was like, there's going to be a case study in this dream. So tonight when I go back to sleep, Matt, I'm going to try to get back into that same dream. But anyway,
drop back in.
So so that history starts at that point, and then they create this lean construction, and we start adapting and making for ourselves. And I say I still fast forward. I didn't learn about this until the middle 2000s, but they start doing this, and a movement starts to grow, and eventually the Lean Construction Institute becomes a nonprofit, and it has a research arm that generates research. And then at some point they split off, and they created this International Group for Lean Construction, IGLC. And IGLC now just does research papers, and they have their own website, and they publish dozens of conference papers studying people like myself, practitioners in industry, in operations, doing lean construction things. And so they write papers about it, and it's to increase awareness and create a space. And we have an annual Congress every year in October, and I think this will be the 26th Congress this year, 26 years of doing these events where people from all over the industry, and I think it's typically like even 14 to 15 countries come and participate with us in the United States. And we're just showing how we've adopted and adapted some of these concepts and what we're doing. And I've had the good fortune of teaching Scrum to that for a while now, but I'm not the originator of bringing Agile to it. It was done in some of the early days, according to legend. And I've asked Jeff about this, and he's like, legend is accurate. There was a mixing of the lean construction people and the Agile people at similar conferences. Nobody can remember what conferences they were at. It definitely wasn't at each other's, because in the early 90s, there weren't any dedicated conferences for just those things. So they were at other conferences learning these improvement things. They're probably Deming conferences, no, and then or something like that. And they cross-pollinated each other. They learned from each other. So some of the people still alive remember that they had that learning. And both systems, the Last Planner system and Scrum, are built on the same PDCA, or if you're old enough to remember, PDSA framework, which stands for Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Plan, Do, Check Act. Yeah, Check Act. And so both of those systems are pull systems, PULL, that limit, push, and create, they allow things to happen on demand and adjustments to be made with a included feedback loop. Now, I would say that having learned both systems, and I teach both systems as well. For LCI, I teach Last Planner system. Scrum gives you a more consistent feedback loop, and the iterations are much faster. And in my own experimentation, Matt, all of my productivity explosions have been after learning Scrum. I did have some initial massive gains when I just learned what Lean was. I'd more than doubled my productivity. But with Scrum, I've tripled, quadrupled, and whatever 5 times better is multiple times. And it's just why I can sit in 2 volunteer positions. Just took a board position. This just happened over the weekend. I'm now a board member of Field Verified. It's official. It's official, Brian. I'm coming out. I'm telling Matt. Yeah. So, and then I advised a couple of software companies in addition to working, 50 plus hours a week at Bolt. So people are like, how do you have all that free time? Easy. I use Scrum, and it creates all this additional capacity.
Well, I think that's, I want to double click in on that a little bit from, at least from my perspective. I have a lot of experience in technology, different tech companies and financial services and so forth with Agile and Lean and Scrum and manufacturing. But little to zero on the construction side. And I'm curious for me and for our listeners, can you describe a way a Scrum team operates, like in your world or in the construction world? Is it similar to technology? Because I think of 2-week sprints with a Scrum master and less than 10 people on the team, and and you have some development engineers, some QA, and different people in there mixing and sharing roles and cross-training skills. And so just paint that picture a little bit, if you could. How does it relate to a construction project or initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a short answer here on the show. And then for your listeners that want a deeper dive, I actually read the current Scrum Guide and give construction commentary, including typical roles I see in these positions, because there's only 3 roles in Scrum: product owner, Scrum Master, and the development team, or just the team, as I like to call them. And that's chapter 9 of my book as well, which I give away for free as a podcast episode at theebfcshow.com or at constructionscrum.com. Click on book links, and it's one of the first things that you'll get is access to that. And the easiest way is the podcast. But exactly like you said, Matt, in construction, if a team wants to do Scrum, we'll typically see on the general contractor side. I see it more on the general contractor side, though I have trained drywall foremen, electrical foremen, and specialty HVAC companies have come through my Scrum training through LCI, because I teach a Scrum class through LCI as well, in addition to teaching a registered Scrum Master course, which is that's the 2-day, and you get a certificate signed by Dr. Jeff Sutherland. But at LCI, you just get a certificate signed by LCI. but I'm the teacher. But then you do get a continuing education credit. So people, it's worth it. So worth it. Such a bargain. In construction, we typically see on the general contractor side, let me start with that team first. You'll see there's typically a superintendent and a project manager, so 2 leads on larger commercial construction, and then they'll have project engineers that act as trade managers. And depending on if the general contractor is heavier towards construction management or heavier towards design build, it does make a difference in how these teams operate and organize. But I've often seen, if they're in the construction phase, the superintendent acting as a product owner, which people are it's kind of surprising, but it's not surprising, because they're the one interfacing with the client the most, and they bring the voice of the customer into what the team does. And they they are responsible for everything that happens on the site. And so the whole rest of the team will act as the development team members. And most of these teams, even on large commercial construction projects, let me throw some dollars at you. So like a $70 to $125 million size project can have a staff of, on the general contractor side, of 5 to 8 people total, right? And as you go bigger, more people, right? $2 billion size project can have 200 people on the staff, but that'll include the design team and the engineering team as well. So in the construction phase, smaller team. The project manager will often act as a Scrum Master in construction phase. Now, in design build, or the architect, engineer, and there's multiple types of design build, where it could be designer-led, general contractor-led, or developer-led. I'm going to focus on the general contractor-led because that's the most common. So in the general contractor-led design build, the architect and design teams work for the general contractor directly. And the owner has one contract with the general contractor, the design builder. And they don't even call them the general contractor. They call them the design builder. But check their business license. They're a general contractor. And so in that situation, now you have designers. So on that, in the design phase, before construction, before shovel in the ground, I typically see the Scrum Master still being a project manager. But now, it's still it could be, now the Scrum Master PM can be in the design firm. And then all of the product owner now will be what the Design Build Institute of America calls the design build PM, or they call them the leader. And so that person, the DBPM, design build project manager, that person acts as the product owner. Because they're the liaison to the client. And as I was reading, I just passed my test and got my DBIA credential. Just happened on February 12th. So just recently. In my studying, when DBIA describes the attributes of this design build project manager leader, the DBPM leader, and if you took the product owner attributes and descriptions, put them side by side, they're almost a mirror.
Fantastic.
I was like, I wonder where DBIA got these ideas from. Yeah. So yeah, on that side, the architect will act. I've seen many good architects acting as scrum masters with their teams. It's phenomenal. And then I just recently posted on LinkedIn, Matt. I said, because one of my students would be, he's from Canada, so very smart, already above average. Mike Good, what a great student Mike Good is. Shout out to Mike. And Mike said, Felipe, the way you describe Scrum at scale, which is when you have multiple Scrum teams, and he said, this is Mike's, not mine. His understanding of last planner system, he's like, they seem almost identical. And I said, oh, you painted, you're a good student, Mike. Go to the top of the class. And I think Mike almost passed his test with 100%. So he's phenomenal. And I said, in fact, those two systems are almost identical, different vocabulary words. And so I posted on LinkedIn a picture of just using the Scrum at scale, the scale daily Scrum, which is the scale daily, the scale stand up. And then I showed the last planner system daily huddle. That's their name, daily huddle, huddle, scale daily huddle, scale daily Scrum, almost identical, right? And I showed the people, and I drew a line down the center, and I put the typical what we all recognize in Agile as the Scrum framework with the circle, the arrow pointing off to the right, and then the little circle for the daily huddle. And I overlaid last planner system conversations on top of the Scrum framework. So you see Scrum in the background, last planner conversations laid over on top. So Scrum is acting as the container for last planner. And then to the outside of that, I showed the people, the images of the people and their roles coming to this meeting. So on the Scrum side, you see the Scrum of Scrums Master. I left out the chief product owner on purpose. On purpose, because that's too much for my people in construction. And even the demand on what I've seen in the construction for product owner is zero. I've never taught, I can teach a construction focused product owner course, but there's currently no demand for it. There's so much benefit just from the Scrum Master course. And then and then you've got people like Dave Snowden, who invented the Cynefin framework that says product owners aren't necessary. He's like, he said it. I've watched many of his talks, and it's fascinating. So in that example, they're identically the same. It's different words. The labels of the people are different, but it's the same functions happen. And if you put a camera on a Scrum of Scrums Master, and you put a camera on the superintendent, and you went to these two separate meetings, and you looked at what people said, talked about what they pointed to, you'd be like, I'm watching the same thing. It's a rerun. It would look like the same thing of the other one. So that's what I sketched out and I put out there. I didn't put it out until Monday. So
you put a visual out there, like a visual that compares.
I did a big picture. Yeah. So I'll send you that picture so you could get it.
Yeah, I'm gonna repost that to my audience. That's fantastic. I'm a very visual learner as well, and just as you described all that, it locked in. I do Scrum at Scale certified as well practitioner and all this, so I could understand exactly what you're saying. I think having a visual artifact for that would be great for our audience to really plug that in. Plus, I introduced you to my brother, I think a few months ago, but he's big in the hospitality space, and there's a lot of overlap in hospitality with construction. And him and I have been talking about Agile and his world hospitality for years now, and how that can help optimize their systems and programs and so forth. So by bringing you into the mix and the conversation you had with him, it sort of brings it all together, because it's in the fabric of across all industries. And you provide some personal examples of how you've used Scrum and Agile thinking to optimize your schedule. I've done the same thing for me, and I've always had a double full-time schedule, I guess, across all my different activities, and it's fun because it's not about being busier. It's about being more productive and getting the most important things done, more quickly, and the things that matter, basically, done.
Absolutely. And you did mention something I forgot to talk about, the sprint duration. So in the early days of Scrum, they used to, and the early Scrum guide was like over 100 pages long, as was the first Last Planner guide, was also over 100 pages long. And now both of those are almost at sub 20 pages each. And the current Scrum guide, when you take out the acknowledgments, I think is 12 pages.
Yeah.
It's only 12 pages of reading. And I do have a copy of the Last Planner guide which is like 13 pages. So they're almost, that's how similar these things are to describe. It's so funny. But the common cycle of time in construction, commercial construction, and even residential construction is monthly. So the sprint would be 4 weeks. So 4 weeks is the most common. And when I work with teams to ease them in, we stay on that 4 week cycle to start often. Because people always ask, like, where should I start? And I said, I personally run on 1 week cycles because I want 52 at bats for improvement and closing the loop on feedback. But I have the capacity to be shifted into that. There's a couple more meetings, versus the 4 week sprint. But in the 4 week sprint, your meetings are longer because you're planning a bigger horizon, and then you're having to close the feedback loop on a longer period of time. So it's almost identically the same amount of time, but people's perception is like, I can't do it every week. It's like, well, if you've already started with I can't, then you're right. You can't. I was like, but there are millions of people around the world that can and do. You're just not there. You're not among them yet, but you'll get there. So we start, if people are really struggled in capacity challenge, we'll start with a 1 month cycle for sprints. And then we downshift very quickly. Most teams that I work with in construction downshift to 1 week almost immediately.
Wow.
Almost nobody.
Really?
Yeah. Very few teams are on the 2 week cycle. Now in design, the earlier in design they are, like when they're in concept, validation, or in concept to schematic design. And then this process that I was talking about with your brother called validation, which he wasn't aware of. So I was like teaching him some new construction things.
Yeah.
When you go through those cycles, the closer you get to getting to detailed design, that's when the designers will shift from 2 week sprints to 1 week sprints after they cross that threshold, because the work becomes much more known and the variables and the complexity does decrease significantly. And so, but when there's high uncertainty for them, the 2 week cycle, because there's so many decisions that have to happen that create these domino effects and all these different, if you watch the Loki system, the Loki Marvel show, it'd be like different branches on the timeline. Yeah. So like the designer's sitting there on the timeline watching all these branches in front of them. If the owner decides this, or if the manufacturer gives us this thing, then it changes the whole thing of how it's going to go. So for them, sometimes the 2 week cycle is the easiest to manage, and you can fit those decision-making things into that, because they need time from decision to actually creating the work, like creating design details or creating charrettes or the different deliverables that the design team has. It can't be like they hear from the owner and they instantaneously have the thing. Like they need time to create their work like everybody else.
And that makes a lot of sense. You talk about the more variability, or the more questions or uncertainty that are there. Typically, the longer the sprint that you would want in there, as when you get it down to more predictable or more known quantity work. That's when it goes down to like from a 4 week to a 2 week to a 1 week sprint. And then it even gets into, we haven't used the term Kanban in this discussion yet, but it even gets almost to a Kanban level of thinking where it's just more flow. Like we know what we got to do. We're just going to flow. We're going to optimize flow. And that doesn't even have sprint boundaries.
So there was another, so just great timing, Matt. So I posted a rabbit hole question because somebody asked me about flow efficiency versus resource efficiency. So I have that post and that visual as well that I need to share with you so you can show your audience. And on that picture, I actually have a rabbit coming out of a rabbit hole on the corner of that image, just to show people like this hole of flow efficiency, which Matt just described briefly. That rabbit hole is deep. That is a deep rabbit hole.
It goes deep.
That's the place where people, like, if you're in a process and you're thinking like our throughput is only X, like your throughput's here. When you focus on flow, you can double that throughput for no money, for free. You can become twice as fast for free. And a lot of people don't know how to prioritize that and put that into practice. So we'll leave that for your audience to fall into that rabbit hole if they want to.
I love that. It's fantastic stuff. And I find it impressive that in your industry, in the construction field, they go from the 4 weeks to the 1 week. From my experience in technology over the last 15 or so years, used to be more of like a 4 week sprint, and then it went to a 3 week, and now it's sort of settled on 2. Like most of the technology companies that I've seen over the last decade plus are on like a 2-week sprint. I've had a little bit of experience with teams moving to one. They're like, hey, we're doing great at 2. Let's go to 1. And they go to 1. There's that mindset, uncomfortable piece of it. Like, how are we going to get all this done? And like you said, all of the meetings, ceremonies, whatever you want to call them, all the parts of the process are skinny down. So when you're doing 1 week, it's like quick, and again, back to where we started this discussion. When you get to attrition, I wanted to ask you about what are your thoughts about how attrition affects a Scrum team's ability to be efficient and effective? Like if you're down doing 1 week sprints and you're rolling, and all of a sudden 25% of your team, moves or leaves, and you have to. How does that affect your world from your experience with whether it's related to velocity or team happiness or any other factors of success that go into your Scrum teams?
Those are one of the things that we actually borrow. There's a couple of patterns from the Scrum Patterns book, The Spirit of the Game, and we talk about that when team members come and go. You have all these invisible cultural things, or how the team acts and behaves, and also trust levels are a factor. And if you don't acknowledge that, this is what people in the West call the learning curve, or what people that routinely hire and fire people call onboarding, or the onboarding process, or getting to productive rates. In non-agile teams, the learning curve in the construction industry is anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So you take any position, and I mean any position, entry level or experienced hire, until that person is as productive as the people that have been at the company for at least 5 years. It takes 2 to 5 years for them to get equal to the throughput rates of people that have been there for at least 5. And why is it 5? Because it can sometimes take 5 years to learn everything to get up to speed. Now, on agile teams, I've had some Scrum teams that I've worked with for multiple years. Their onboarding rate now has shifted from 2 years to a week. And it's like we've had, and I think there's a case study on my website at the EBFC show blog, possibly about, that mentions this like in a sentence or two, but I didn't expand on it in the case study because nobody was like that interested like you are.
Yeah.
But I talked to the executive and I said, this team, since they went full Scrum, you've had interns come right out of school that have no estimating experience. This was an estimating team. And I said, how long does it typically take these summer interns to get to the point where they can actually do like their own takeoffs, their own estimates, like even just like the basic quantity estimating, not even volumetric? And he says it takes the whole summer. And he's like, some of them never get there. Some would never get there. And I said, now how about since your team went Scrum? He's like, 2 days every time.
Whoa.
They're there within 2 days. And I was like, what's the difference? And so I went to the Scrum team and I started asking questions about this. And they said, the difference is now we have a process. We show the people on day 1, like all of the ceremonies we're going to have, the meetings, the Scrum meetings. And we tell them like why we have this meeting, what we do. And then we walk them through, because they have a physical Kanban board in their space of a Scrum board. We walk them through the Scrum board. So we connect the meetings we have with the process visual. And we show them, they can see on the Scrum board how their work will be made visual too. And so now the person gets a full context of like how this team works. All the invisible is now visible and they can see it. And so the people know how to play. And then they can, now that they know all that context, they can focus on like what the work is. And so they spend a couple days shadowing. This is another pattern called pair programming. They shadow and work side by side with somebody who's experienced in the software. And the software is intuitive. Like on-screen takeoff is actually pretty easy to use. Like again, I said I used to be an estimator and I quite enjoyed it. It's kind of soothing to just count things and then create these beautiful spreadsheets. Right? So now they can focus on the second part of the first day. They're already pair programming. What we say pair programming, they say getting on the job training. But in Agile, we'll say pair programming because that's it's the pattern that describes what they're doing. And then by day 2, they're now doing some stuff on their own. And then by day 3, they're almost completely independent, but they're not abandoned because they're co-located in the same space, and they can literally just turn and say like, hey, is this right? And turn this way and say like, hey, I'm working on this. Can I get a second pair of eyes on this? So they start to get more independent over time. But from the company's perspective, when they look at what the output is equal to a 5-year person by day 3.
Wow. You just described how Agile, Lean, and Scrum techniques and processes can reduce the cost of attrition for companies significantly.
And then that team, that estimating team, it gets even better, Matt. That team with that process, typically people in construction don't want to be estimators forever. They typically don't. So they have to rotate people through. That team, there were 2 years where that team got offered to go do projects, and they said, no, I want to stay. I'd rather stay in this. And they actually started to go visit projects, which is something they never did. Never. They never would go visit. Now they had capacity where they could go visit a job that they estimated and see all the things in real life at different phases of the job. And they started visiting projects throughout the year, and their estimates got even better. That team was able to be equal to a team of twice their size. And at one point, even more. And that those numbers I do actually have. And we even did a webinar, the Scrum Academy come on and do a webinar where I just talked about that part of that team. So but Matt, remember I told you that there's this part about making a place where engagement stays high. There were still people in that organization that could not understand how this team was so effective. And they used to complain. There were people in management that used to complain that these people didn't work hard enough.
Wow.
And I said, based on what? I said, what deadlines have they? I've asked them. And I would get in front as the Scrum Master, as the Scrum of Scrum's Master, and the Scrum Master for the organization at the time. You have to like put yourself in the way, put yourself in harm's way. Yep. So I had to stand, almost nose to nose with an executive. It was like 3 levels above me at the time. And I said, based on what? Tell me your concerns so that I can understand and help the team. So I got to go communicate this back to the team. So, lay it on. And it turned out it was just petty jealousy because that individual couldn't figure out how to get their shit done in a work day. Whereas these people were getting super complex projects and takeoffs done, and they didn't have to work 8 hours a day. They could work less than 8. And they even at one point filmed a video for me, like it was a play on The Office. Yeah. And they filmed it during work hours. I mean, they had like full like HD camera. People were mic'd, acted, scripted, different locations, changed scenes. I mean, I was like, it was amazing. I was on a business trip, so I missed all the filming. And they just handed me like a thumb drive and said, watch this video. We made this for you. It was so good.
That's amazing. Wow. So many good stories. And Felipe, we could go on for more and more. There's so much more. I think having you back on for another podcast would make a lot of sense. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of good feedback, especially from the hardcore Agile practitioners in our audience, which we have a number of. As we wrap up, to bring it to a close, let's talk about your top 3 takeaways. We just covered a lot of ground, but your top 3 takeaways for leaders today, current and future leaders. What are your top 3 tips that you have for an individual to succeed and really bring out more of their best in the workplace today?
Yeah, I'd say what you hold to be near and dear, your beliefs, you should challenge regularly yourself. Don't challenge other people. Challenge your own beliefs. Like what you think is possible. Some of the things that we talked about in the show and some of these productivity breakthroughs, they're not common. And they're not common because people have limiting beliefs. So I'd say spend some time with what you think is true and then understand that you might be wrong. I was wrong in the past about some of these beliefs. And through learning and experimentation, I changed. So my second tip is experiment. Try these things for yourself. All change happens first in the space between your ears. No change happens outside without change happening inside first. So my second tip, and if you study change management, and John Carter is one of the best for big organizational change, it always starts with the individual leaders. And so change yourself first, and then everything else will become super easy. This is one of the reasons why coaches like myself and Matt get the results we get, because the beliefs we have and then the experimentation that we do. And then the third thing is it doesn't have to be expensive. You can use what are called safe to fail experiments. You can create a small experiment at a micro level of some change that you want to implement. You can try something out. The cheapest person to experiment with is, again, yourself. So if you've been watching this podcast and you've still never been on a Scrum team, make your own Scrum team. You can occupy all three roles. You can be the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the developer. It's not recommended for a long term, but you can absolutely do it for the short term and to learn, what do these roles entail? What's the focus of one role versus the other? Can you occupy both? It's not impossible for a Scrum Master and a PO to be the same person, but it's rare. It's so rare that the role was separated. So experiment with yourself. Like, I even have a free course, Matt, on my store at the ebfcshow.com. Click on store, or if you go to constructionscrum.com, there's a free 30-minute Scrum course to get you started. It's just focused on using a goal that you want this week, creating a Scrum board, and having an easy process. And the course is 30 minutes, but I mean, in all honesty, it's probably like 22 minutes, but you need some time to let it to seep in. And I did publish a case study from someone that took that free course and had a nearly 70% improvement in their construction schedule using what they learned in that free course immediately after learning it. So, I mean, it is magical what can happen when you apply Scrum to different situations. And I'm going to give you a bonus fourth thing. Here's the bonus number 4. You don't need to do Scrum with everybody in your company, your department, or your project to have a successful Scrum implementation. It can be as small as 1 or 2 people.
That's fantastic. Felipe, thank you so much for covering all that. There's so much more to unpack. I know there's going to be a lot of comments, a lot of interest, and I'm excited to share. I appreciate you sharing all those links. I want to share them out with our audience as well, because there's a lot of, I love the fact that you have a lot of examples, free resources, materials, and things like that, visual aids to really help people go deeper down the rabbit hole with all these things. So thank you again for your time, your attention, your energy, all your insights today. Oh, really, really enjoyed it, Felipe. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Matt. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.